This is a talk about Young Earth Creationism. The title of the talk is What is the Problem with Young Earth Creationism? I'm going to suggest that there are some very serious problems with Young Earth Creationism as it's typically presented and developed. By Young Earth Creationism, I mean the view that the entire universe is around about 6,000 years old. The whole universe is only about 6,000 years old, certainly not more than 10,000 years old, and all of the various animal kinds that exist, now I'm using a Young Earth Creationist term here, kind, all of the various kinds were created by God as described in the book of Genesis. So they're Young Earth Creationists are Bible literalists, and they reject evolution by natural selection. They deny that any species has appeared in that way. Who believes Young Earth Creationism? Around about 45% of Americans do, if a number of fairly reliable looking polls are to be trusted. There have also been polls that suggest that around about a third of college-educated Americans believe that the entire universe is 6,000 years old. So this is a very, surprisingly, you might think, widespread belief, not the sort of thing that we sensible Brits would believe, you might think. But actually, a 2006 survey of UK students indicated around about 12% of them were Young Earth Creationists. 19% of the students that were surveyed said that they had at some point been taught Young Earth Creationism as fact in school, but perhaps we should allow that possibly that was when they were really quite young. You know, perhaps they were told that there was Noah's Ark and the flood and so on, that these things literally happened. Perhaps they were told that at a very young age. Those who believe in Young Earth Creationism very often believe that the theory is at least as well confirmed as the theory of evolution and, you know, the Big Bang Theory, which makes the universe come out at over 13 billion years old, about 13.75 billion years old. They suggest that their theory is just as scientific, just as scientifically well supported as the orthodox alternatives. So, how do they do that then? How do they account for something like the fossil record? The theory of evolution says that species have evolved over hundreds of millions of years from a common ancestor or gene pool, and the fossil record certainly fits with that. But if, as the Young Earth Creationists claim, all species, all kinds, if you prefer, were created simultaneously just 6,000 years ago, surely there should either be no fossils, because there just hasn't been enough time for them to form in the ground, or they should at least be jumbled up through all of the sedimentary layers. They shouldn't appear in the very specific way that they do throughout the sedimentary layers. So how do Young Earth Creationists account for this layering of the fossil record, the way in which the fossils are organised within the sedimentary layers? Do you know how they do that? I'm sure many of you do. Flood is the current leading explanation is to explain this phenomenon in terms of the biblical flood. So Adam and Eve inhabited the earth along with all of the other species as described in Genesis, including the dinosaurs. Here's a slide from one of the Young Earth Creationists museums. I think this is Ken Ham's museum in the United States, where you can see a young child hanging out with I think that's a velociraptor. And that really happened, so far as this museum is concerned. And the velociraptor was no threat to the child at that time, because velociraptors at this point were vegetarian and didn't eat people. It was the fall that introduced death and pain and suffering into the universe. That would be our fault. What happened later on was that there was this cataclysmic flood. God unleashed the flood. Noah filled his ark with 2 of all of the different species or kinds, or possibly 7 of them. 7 pairs of them. Depends which bit you read. And the rest drowned. All of the other animals, and indeed human beings, drowned, those that were not aboard the ark. The flood produced enormous mud deposits, and the animals became embedded in the mud. But rather than being buried in a random way, they were buried in a particular order. So, for example, man, you might expect, being the smartest, would manage to survive longest, you might suggest. And so you would expect him to be buried last and so appear only in the topmost layers. So we have an explanation for that. Simple sea creatures would presumably be buried first because they're at the bottom of the sea and they're going to get covered up first. And then other ordering can be explained in terms, it's suggested by Young Earth Creationists, in terms of the different rates at which the corpses of these different species float and sink. And also, perhaps, and here's a quotation from a Young Earth Creationist, the fossil record can be more reasonably explained by flood geologists as due to the order of burial of the different ecological zones of organisms by the flood waters. So, as we've already pointed out, shallow marine organisms will be the first to be destroyed by the fountains of the great deep breaking open, with the erosional runoff from the land due to torrential rainfall concurrently burying them. And then here is Ken Ham in his Creation Museum. We would probably not expect to find human remains in the early flood strata, which would contain only shallow marine organisms. The fossil record, as we understand it at the moment, certainly fits with this. So there are a number of explanations which are offered there for the particular way in which the fossils are ordered throughout the sedimentary layers. But of course, there are lots of other peculiar anomalies so far as Young Earth creationism is concerned. There are many more questions, certainly, that we might want answers to at this point. So you might ask, well, how did Noah get the penguins from Antarctica and the polar bears from the Arctic and the possums from Australia and so on board his ark? That's a very long way for them to travel. In many cases, vast oceans separate these creatures from the ark. So how did Noah manage to get them on board? But they have explanations for that too. So, you might suggest that God, being omnipotent, would certainly have the ability to help them in some manner, perhaps create little boats for them or something. But actually the leading suggestion is that at that time there was just one great big continent, a single continent, sort of Pangaea type continent. And so the various animals could walk. They could find their way across the land to Noah's Ark. It was the flood itself that broke that huge continent up into the continents that we see today that explains why they are now separated by vast bodies of water. See, it's all beginning to make sense now. How did Noah get a T-Rex on board, and how did he feed it? Well, explanations include maybe Noah, that is, had T-Rex eggs. See, then you don't need a whole T-Rex. Or you might suggest that T-Rex was a vegetarian at that time, so he wouldn't need to eat any of the other animals, and so on and so forth. I mean, you could suggest that God just shrank them to pocket size, like Harry in his Bucket Full of Dinosaurs, I suppose. It's, if you're familiar with that kids' programme, that would be another explanation. Who knows? One way or another, they're going to make their explanation fit. They're going to show how the empirical data is consistent with the story that they wish to tell. So, but of course there are yet other problems. What about all those craters on the moon? We know that objects only infrequently hit the moon and produce a crater. And we know that there are very many craters on the moon. So clearly the moon has been hit by these objects over very long periods of time. But, it's not that difficult to cook up a story to explain that. You could say, well, there were a great many objects which were rapidly attracted to the moon. It hoovered up the objects, and so now there are none left. And that's why it's so pockmarked, but there's so little debris around now. What about the light from distant stars, which takes, in many cases, thousands of years to get here, many more thousands of years than have elapsed since the beginning of the universe? How do you explain that? Well, you can read papers published in creationist journals which account for that phenomena by appealing to something like a rapid expansion model of the universe or a time dilation, and there are equations and all sorts of scientific-looking stuff in these papers to make them look really pretty credible to somebody that doesn't know anything about the subject. The White Cliffs of Dover, if you're familiar with the White Cliffs, you probably know that the White Cliffs are made out of the tiny calcium deposits left by tiny marine organisms. It takes a huge amount of time, many thousands of years, to accumulate at the bottom of the sea that depth of deposit, a lot longer than 6,000 years. So how would you explain, as a young Earth creationist, the existence of those white cliffs? Well, they explain that by appealing to algae blooms in the sea. There's a theory of algae blooms which is supposed to account for that. The ice cores at the Antarctic, where you can see that, year after year, it's just like tree rings going down for about 120,000 years. You can see that represented in the ice cores that are drilled in the cold places of this planet. They're clearly going to have to cook up some story for that, and you can be damn sure they will. In fact, they probably already have several explanations on offer. So, there are multi-million-dollar funded creation research institutes busy developing answers to all of these and many other questions to make creationism consistent with the available evidence. I think that one of the things that young Earth creationists do, which allows them to convince themselves that what they believe is scientifically credible, is that they convince themselves of a theory about what it is for a theory to be confirmed that's not quite right, but looks plausible, has a certain veneer to it, plausible veneer to it. And that's the first thing really that I want to draw your attention to. I call it the fit theory of confirmation. Surely, you might say, science is all about developing your theory in such a way that it fits the available evidence. What else are scientists doing if they're not doing that? And so if you can make your theory fit the evidence, if you can make your theory consistent with the available evidence, then surely it is just as well confirmed as any other theory that fits the evidence, that is consistent with the evidence. And that's what young Earth creationists and their multi-million-dollar funded institutes do. They show how you can make it all fit. You can make it all consistent. You can cook up endless stories to account for all of these various anomalies. But actually, the fit theory of confirmation is wrong. And that's really the first thing that I want to point out in this little talk. The young Earth creationist approach to evidence turns on a misunderstanding of what confirmation is. Yes, they try to make their theory consistent with the evidence, but, and here's the first point really, any theory, no matter how nuts, can be made to fit the evidence. Right? It doesn't matter how ludicrous your theory is, one way or another, you can make it consistent with the available evidence. Given enough ingenuity and determination, you can just keep going, keep explaining away all the anomalies. And the way in which I wish to illustrate that is with my pet theory, quite literally a pet theory. It's that dogs are spies from the planet Venus. That is my theory, let's suppose. So on my view, dogs are planning an invasion. It is imminent. The Venusian invasion is going to be with us shortly, and then you won't be laughing. The dogs that are here are sending back their secret reports to Venus, to the invasion force. Now, you probably think that that's a bit nutty, but what I can do is, for every objection you raise, I can probably cook up an explanation. Let's have a look. You might say, Stephen, dogs can't even speak. I say, yeah, they can. They just choose to hide their language from us. You've got to remember, we're dealing with advanced alien beings. Of course they're going to have that ability. You might say, but Stephen, Venus is a dead planet. It's horribly hot and swathed in clouds of sulfuric acid. No dog could survive on the surface of that planet. I say, they don't live on the surface. They live in deep underground bunkers from which they are planning their invasion. Why do you think they want to come here? They don't want to live there anymore. It's too unpleasant. So I can accommodate that piece of evidence too. Dogs have no transmitters to send their secret reports, you might say. I say they do. You might not find the transmitter in the dog's basket. It's in its brain. It's secreted away in there. You might say, well, we've dissected the dog's brain and we can't find any transmitter. I say it's made out of material which is indistinguishable from brain stuff, and that's why you can't detect it. You might say, we've scanned the dog's brain, there's nothing coming out. I say they are transmitting on a frequency or within a medium that is currently beyond our ability to detect. Okay? Remember, these beings are beyond our, far beyond us technologically. Of course they're going to have this kind of technology. So the mere fact that you can't detect the signals is no evidence that there ain't no signals there, is it? So you can see how that conversation could continue, irritatingly forever, pretty much, right? Ad nauseum. And in fact, if you've ever spoken to somebody that's perhaps suffering from some sort of mental condition, you might remember having a conversation a bit like that, where they become utterly convinced of the truth of something which strikes you as perhaps ludicrous. But if they're smart and intelligent and resourceful, they will be able to just endlessly cook up explanations for every last problem that you generate for their worldview. So we can all do that. If you succeed in doing that, if you succeed in showing that your theory is consistent with the evidence in that way, does that mean your theory is well confirmed? Well, obviously not. I mean, that's not a well-confirmed theory, is it, that dogs are spies from the planet Venus? Clearly, even though it can be made consistent with the evidence, it's not confirmed by the evidence. So to begin with, just flagging up this seductive myth that good science is about using one's ingenuity to construct theories that fit the evidence. True, on that view of science, young Earth creationism does look like good science. It can be made to look like good science. In fact, it can be made to look just as good as the Big Bang / theory of evolution, worldview, as they see it. But any theory, no matter how absurd, can be made to fit the evidence. That does not mean it's reasonable. It does not mean it's confirmed. In fact, it may be absurd and straightforwardly, empirically falsified, which I take it the theory about dogs being spies from the planet Venus is straightforwardly, empirically falsified. To make a theory fit the evidence is not to show that it has been confirmed. Now, earlier on, you heard about a philosopher of science called Karl Popper. I'm certainly not here endorsing everything that Popper says. I'm not signing up to falsificationism, for a start, for much the reasons that James mentioned. But Popper has got some good insights, it seems to me. He certainly stresses the importance of testability so far as theories are concerned. If whatever happens, your theory would be consistent with the available evidence, then your theory is unfalsifiable. And Popper thought that was a very serious failing in any theory that claimed to be scientific. In fact, he thought that it was sufficient to render the theory unscientific. Now, that claim is probably too strong, but I think that it's fair to say that a lack of falsifiability certainly counts against a theory. If you have two theories and one is falsifiable and the other one is not, you should probably be leaning towards the more falsifiable theory, other things being equal. Popper looked at theories such as Marxism and Freud's and Adler's theories of the mind, of the unconscious. And he thought that those theories looked scientific to people, but on closer examination were not scientific, or at least were not scientific anymore. He thought that Marx's theory of history was falsified because Marx's theory of history predicted that there would be a revolution and it would happen here in a technologically advanced country. But no, it happened in technologically backward-ass Russia. That falsified the theory. But in order to accommodate that falsification, the defenders of Marxism made various adjustments to their theory. And at that point, Popper thought, they made their theory unfalsifiable. Once you've gone down that route of just endlessly explaining away the anomalies, you make your theory unfalsifiable. And at that point, it's not even science anymore. So this was Popper's criticism of Marxism. It's not even science. I think that may be too strong, but it's certainly, you can see what the problem is, so far as just endlessly explaining away any anomaly in that kind of way. Freud's and Adler's psychoanalytic theories, Popper thought were immune to refutation, falsification right from the start. It's just by their nature they cannot be falsified. Whatever happens, you'll find that there will be a way within the theory itself to account for whatever happens. There's never going to be any kind of conflict with the facts as far as these theories are concerned. So a lack of falsifiability is an interesting feature of these kinds of theories that Popper was very critical of. But one thing that really struck him about followers of the theories, which also strikes me, is this, that once you've really got yourself wedded to one of these theories, it can strike you as very peculiar that other people can't see what you can see, right? It's blindingly bloody obvious to you that Marx's theory of history is true, and you look around and you explain to people the truth of your theory, and for some reason they can't see it. They can't understand it. They can't see what you can see. Why is that? And why is it when you, as a Freudian, explain your psychoanalytic theory to other people and they just look at you baffled and can't understand why you believe what you do? What's gone wrong there? It seems to you obvious that it's true. It seems to you that wherever you look, you find that your theory is indeed endlessly being confirmed. But other people, for some strange reason, can't see what you can see. And so you have to cook up a kind of explanation for their inability to see it. And so in the case of a Marxist, the Marxist might say, well, the reason that you can't see that it's true is because you're drunk on the opiate of the masses, or there'll be some other explanation which they will develop. Or if you're a Freudian, you'll come up with some theory about, oh, you're all too repressed to see the truth of my particular Freudian theory and so on. So you need to explain away the anomalies in that way, the lack of your critics, their lack of ability to see what it is that you can see. Here's a quotation from Popper. He says, "I found that those of my friends who were admirers of Marx and Freud and Adler were impressed by a number of points common to these theories, and especially by their apparent explanatory power. These theories appear to be able to explain practically everything that happened within the fields to which they referred. The study of any of them seemed to have the effect of an intellectual conversion or revelation. Open your eyes to a new truth hidden from those not yet initiated." He continues, "Once your eyes were thus opened, you saw confirmed instances everywhere. The world was full of verifications of the theory. Whatever happened always confirmed it. Thus its truth appeared manifest, and unbelievers were clearly people who did not want to see the manifest truth, who refused to see it either because it was against their class interest or because of their repressions, which were still unanalysed and crying aloud for treatment." I think Popper's right about that. I think these kinds of belief systems do tend to have that effect on people. People become true believers with a capital T and a capital B. It becomes so clear to them that what they believe is true that it's puzzling to them that other people can't see this too. And it seems to me that Ken Ham also nicely exhibits this tendency. He says, why can't the humanists, the evolutionists, see that all the evidence supports exactly what the Bible says? It is because they do not want to see it. It is not because the evidence is not there. They refuse to allow the evidence to be correctly interpreted in light of biblical teaching. So it's all of you lot that are deluded, as far as Ken Ham is concerned. He's become so wedded to his belief system that it's just inconceivable that, someone like you would not be able to see its truth if you were to look at the evidence with clear eyes. It's deeply baffling to him why you would fail to believe it if it wasn't that you had perhaps been led astray by devils or corrupted by sin or whatever it is. I suppose this would apply to Roman Catholics as well, because they too reject young earth creationism. So the first moral is that any theory, no matter how absurd, can be made to fit the evidence. That doesn't make it confirmed or supported by the evidence. So what then is required for confirmation? Well, I'll very quickly sketch out an idea about one way in which a theory is really confirmed. Here's one way you can do it. Get your theory to make some predictions, right? Derive predictions from your theory that are clear and precise, not vague and woolly. So don't say something like, you're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome stranger. No, say you're going to meet a man over 6 feet that has hair of exactly this colour and so on. Be precise, because that makes your theory all the more falsifiable, of course. Secondly, make predictions that are true, unlike all those ones about the end of the world that were made recently turning out not to be true. And then, and this is very important, make predictions that are surprising, that you would not otherwise expect to be the case. Don't, for example, predict that the sun will rise tomorrow on your newfangled psychic divination theory. That's something we would expect anyway. If it turns out the sun rises tomorrow, that hardly confirms your theory, really. You need to predict things which you wouldn't otherwise expect to be true. So, if we take the theory of evolution and common descent, unlike young Earth creationism, it is strongly confirmed. Why? Well, one reason is it makes numerous predictions that are 1, clear and precise, 2, surprising, and 3, true. And here's just one example. Haldane was once asked, what would constitute evidence against evolution? And he said, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian. That would do it. He says, even one incontrovertible find of any pre-Devonian mammal, bird, or flower would shatter the theory of common descent, certainly as we have it now. These things are just not supposed to be around that early. So here's a more precise way of articulating the prediction. We should never find mammalian or avian bird fossils in or before the Devonian deposits, before reptiles had diverged from the amphibian tetrapod line. This excludes Precambrian, Cambrian, Ordovician and Silurian deposits encompassing 92% of the Earth's geological history and 65% of the biological history of multicellular organisms. That's a very clear, precise and surprising prediction given that the theory of evolution, in its current form, if that theory was not true. And of course, it turns out that every day thousands of fossils are dug up and never do you find a bird or a mammal in any of that, in any of those sedimentary deposits. Never. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fossils constantly being dug up, and it just never, ever happens. Boy, that is surprising if this particular theory is not true. So it's a clear and precise prediction, a surprising prediction, a true prediction, strongly confirms the theory of evolution. What do young Earth creationists predict when they're digging around in the ground? What do they expect us to find? The fact is, it doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter what they dig up, it's all going to be fine for young Earth creationism. What wouldn't fit so far as young Earth creationism is concerned, so far as what you dig out of the ground is concerned. And the young Earth creationists see this as the great strength of their theory, the fact that it doesn't really matter what the hell you dig up, it's always going to be fine for young Earth creationism. So here's a quotation. If human and dinosaur bones are ever found in the same layers, it would be a fascinating find. Those who hold a biblical view of history wouldn't be surprised. Well, of course not, because the dinosaurs and the humans were around at the same time. So Bob's your uncle, no anomaly there. Evolutionists, on the other hand, would have a real challenge. In the old Earth view, man isn't supposed to be the same age as the dinosaurs. As biblical creationists, we don't require that human and dinosaur fossils be found in the same layers. Whether they are found or not does not affect the biblical view of history. Now, here is a young Earth creationist trumpeting as the great virtue of young Earth creationism the fact that it cannot come into conflict with the evidence. And yet that is its great weakness. That is precisely why it cannot be strongly confirmed in the way that young Earth creationism is, in the way that I've just described. So they see as the great strength of their theory what is in truth its greatest weakness. So, it's the lack of commitment about how those fossils are arranged that actually gives the theory of evolution a significant advantage over their own. By making such predictions, the theory of evolution can be strongly confirmed when those predictions are discovered to be true. So far as Popper was concerned, doing science involves taking risks. Scientific theories should stick their necks out and take risks with the evidence. If a theory doesn't take any risks, it can never be falsified, and according to Popper, it's not even a scientific theory. So that's one thing to look out for, so far as young Earth creationism is concerned. Very briefly, here's another thing that often appears in conjunction with the but-it-fits strategy, and I call it the blunderbuss. What you do as a young Earth creationist is you fire off many invented or irrelevant problems in the conversation, in the debate that you're having with some orthodox scientist. You swamp them with questions and puzzles and problems. So, for example, you could say, so you, Mr. Cleverdick scientist, then orthodox scientist, explain where life came from then. Can you do that? And of course, the scientist will scratch his head if you show some humility and say, well, actually, we're working on that and we're not really quite sure. And now they look like they're in trouble, don't they? Oh, so you can't answer this question. Well, we can. Young Earth creationists have an answer. you're struggling, and you can see the audience to this particular conversation may be thinking, well, that's true. They can explain it. They can't explain it. Clearly, evidence in favour of young Earth creationism. Or they might point to Polystrate fossils. There are trees there, look, fossilised, running up through the sedimentary layers. I believe this picture was taken in Yellowstone Park. Now, young Earth creationists love that sort of image. They say, look at that. Those sedimentary layers are supposed to have taken millions of years to lay down. You're telling me the tree stood there for all of that time, getting fossilised through all of those layers? Not possible. Clearly, this happened rapidly, just like we say it did during the flood. This shows that young Earth creationism is true and the flood theory is true, and it refutes the old Earth paradigm. Right? So here's a quotation. Such phenomena clearly violate the idea of a gradually accumulated geological column, since generally speaking, an evolutionary overview of that column suggests that each stratum or layer was laid down over thousands or even millions of years. So I bet most of you are flummoxed by that, aren't you? This is exactly what they're going to do to you in any kind of debate, the young Earth creationists. They're going to fire this stuff at you and you're going to go, that is quite puzzling. How do you explain that? And in the meantime, while you're thinking about that, they've reeled out 10 more. So you're going to look pretty foolish at the end of that conversation. So if you ever want to get involved in a debate with the young Earth creationists, you better be damn sure you're well prepared, because they will make you look a fool if you're not very, very careful. Even if, in fact, you have scientific credentials in some particular area of science, the chances are you won't have any expertise in all of the other areas where they're then going to wheel out this kind of stuff. So be wary. What is the explanation, actually, for those tree fossils? Do you know? Does anyone know? Nobody said that the layers had to be laid down over thousands or millions of years. Obviously, sometimes they are laid down quite quickly. Like in the corner of where a river goes round a bend, the layers get laid down very quickly. Mount St. Helens, when that exploded, you could see the trees getting buried really quickly and the layers were building up. That happens in areas, particularly where there's a lot of geological activity taking place, volcanoes and so on. Where was that picture taken? Yellowstone Park. That's why those fossils were as they were. It's no evidence whatsoever against the old Earth paradigm, as they see it. And then, of course, you get this kind of thing. Explain that, why don't you? Dino tracks and man tracks in the same sedimentary layer. How would you explain that? Well, it's just a fake, obviously. The granddaughter of the man who discovered them later admitted that he'd just carved out the human tracks in order to make money, which is why they look really flaky and not very convincing. Where did life come from? I don't know. Does the fact that we don't know the explanation, we don't possess the answer to that question, does that mean that young Earth creationism gets any additional credibility whatsoever? Of course not. Sherlock Holmes may be having a bad day. He may not know who done it, but he knows the butler didn't, because the butler was with him in the room at the time and has a cast iron alibi. Just because you don't know the answer to a question doesn't mean that you cannot conclusively rule certain answers out. And even while scientists now may not know the answer to the question of where life ultimately came from, it does not mean that they cannot conclusively rule out young Earth creationism, which they can. But if you pile all of these problems and puzzles and so on together and just fire them in a blunderbuss way at your opponent, the chances are they're really going to struggle. So this is the second main argumentative strategy employed by young Earth creationists. I don't say, just to finish off, that making clear, precise and surprising predictions that are true is a necessary condition of being strongly confirmed. It is a sufficient condition, but actually there is a way. It's possible that young Earth creationism could be strongly confirmed. Can you think of a way in which that could happen? A really good way, maybe, would be this, that we dig up fossils that are stamped made by God in 4004 BC. That would do it. That would be, consistently, that would be pretty convincing evidence. If a lot of that kind of thing started cropping up, we would be in big trouble. But of course, it's not that the theory cannot be confirmed. The real problem, I think, is that the theory fails to take any significant risks with the evidence, in particular because they embark upon this particular explaining away but it fits strategy. Once you've gone down that route, just like Marxism, you turn your theory into a sort of quasi-religion at that point, and you're no longer really doing science, I think. It's certainly not good science. Anyway, what I've done here is I've just briefly outlined one of what I consider to be 8 main mechanisms for producing these kind of bullshit belief systems, which I call intellectual black holes. It seems to me our cultural landscape is dotted with belief systems, some of which are like intellectual black holes. If you get too close, they start to exert a gravitational pull upon you, and the unwary passerby can be sucked in and turned into an intellectual prisoner, never ever to escape. And some of them are comparatively benign, but others are rather more dangerous. And certainly I don't want my daughter, walking down the high street in Oxford, where wide-eyed true believers will thrust leaflets into her hand and say, "Have you heard the truth about whatever it is?" And, I want her to have some immunity to that kind of intellectual snake oil. So that's why I wrote this book, Believing Bullshit, which is available in all good bookshops and at the back of the room if you want to find out what the other 7 mechanisms are. This is just one of them. So thank you. Any questions?
Hi, I'm just curious. I've debated Christians, but never a young earther. What do they say about radiometric dating?
Radiometric dating, what do the young Earth creationists say about it?
Yes, how do they get round that? Because any university can do it,
yes,
and it completely refutes their theory.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single thing that they say about it, but the most common thing that they say about it is that we've just got the rate of decay wrong so far as carbon-14 is concerned. And in fact, sometimes they will say there's actually a circularity involved. There isn't, but they say that there's a circularity involved because the only reason we think that carbon decays at the rate that it does is because we've already decided that these things are much older than 6,000 years. That's the only reason we draw the conclusion that carbon-14 does decay at that rate. So there's no evidence there that the world isn't much older than it really is. They say that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Yes?
If somebody doesn't have logic and they don't think science is right, how on earth are you going to stand a hope in swaying them at all?
If they don't have logic and science, how are we ever going to persuade them?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. In fact, their having logic and science is no guarantee that they'll be immune. There's very interesting work done recently on how we're all guilty of and very much prone to confirmation bias. It turns out, for example, that people that are really a bit more mathematically sophisticated are more prone to confirmation bias involving maths-type cases, not less. They're more prone to confirmation bias. And perhaps that's true of other kinds of expertise as well. As a matter of fact, very smart, college-educated people can be highly adept at convincing themselves of a load of old nonsense. There's no guarantee that by educating people about science that you're going to give them any kind of immunity, because they'll just use their skills and their ingenuity to cook up ever more convoluted explanations for all of the evidence against what they believe. I think that probably one of the reasons why I've developed this I'm Mr. Analogy in philosophy. I like analogies. And one of the reasons I like this one and developed another one involving an evil god, which has become associated with me now, is that if you come at the young Earth creationists straight on with the evidence, if they're plugged into the world of young Earth creationism, if they've been reading answers from Genesis and so on, they're going to be ready for you. They're going to shoot it all down, and they're going to chuck a load of stuff back in your face that you're going to struggle to deal with. So I don't recommend that as the way to approach a young Earth creationist. I think the way to approach a young Earth creationist is to get them to recognise that the way in which they're thinking and the way in which they are defending their core belief endlessly against refutation and then firing out the blunderbuss questions, that exactly the same strategy is employed by nutcases. That You know, the man who thinks that dogs are spies from the planet Venus is doing the very same thing. And if they can see that, no, that's insane, I certainly don't want to be thinking in that kind of way, but you can show that they are doing exactly the same thing, I think that's likely to be much more of a shock to the system than just coming at them head on with the usual evidence that they're all ready for. All right, so that's really why I developed the dogs are spies from the planet Venus analogy, because, you know, get them to explain why what they're doing is any different. They won't be able to. It's the same. And what's also interesting about it, that strategy, is it's the same strategy which is employed habitually in religion to deal with things like the evidential problem of evil. Why is there so much evil in the world if there's an all-powerful, all-good God? Surely this is overwhelming evidence against such a God. No, I can cook up 101 cockamamie explanations for that, and that's what they do. And then they, so I've made it fit. My theory fits the evidence. You haven't refuted my theory. It's immune now. They're just doing the same old thing. So this pattern, this way of thinking, is employed across a wide range of belief systems, and when you spot it, a red light should come on. And it always helps to get them to see that they're stuck in that intellectual black hole, to get them to look at another intellectual black hole where they go, oh no, that's just insane, and then you get them to explain why what they're doing is any different, because the fact is it probably isn't. I think that's probably the best way of getting them out, although you may not succeed. There's no guarantee of success, I'm afraid, with my method.
I had the joy of meeting Ken Ham many years ago when I was in sixth form. I'm from Bedford, and Bedford is a very multicultural, multi-faith town, in fact, the most, I think, in the UK. And there are a lot of people at this talk that he did, and we were encouraged by our RS class teacher to go. Really? And when I met him, I found him really quite hostile and aggressive, and actually a bully. And my question is, do you think that Young Earth creationism should be dealt with in a more rigorous way in educational institutes like schools, and also via the media like television? Because often I see programs like on the BBC with this sort of thing, and they treat it sort of with cotton wool, and it kind of enrages me.
Yes, they do. There's this whole respect thing, isn't there? We've got to show respect because it's a religious nutty belief rather than a non-religious nutty belief when it's okay to laugh at it. Yes, no, I'm with James Ladyman. Earlier on, he said he would just ban this in schools. You're not allowed to teach it at all, period. And I would be on board with that. The problem is that I believe, so now I'm going to trot out my conspiracy theory, right, and make myself look like a nutcase. But my conspiracy theory is this, that there is a fifth column of young Earth creationists working in British schools under the radar. No one really knows what it is that they're up to, but they are there. Do you remember that statistic right at the beginning? 19% of students had been taught young Earth creationism at school as fact at some point. I gave a talk at a very well-known, very expensive British public school about origins of the universe and cosmological theories and so on, and the science teacher started giving me a really hard time while I was giving the talk, and at the end I asked him, I said, how old do you think the universe is? And he refused to say, which is not a good sign, right? And then I talked to some of the pupils, and they said, oh yeah, he thinks the universe is 6,000 years old. We get this in the science class. This was, one of the really big public schools. This wasn't a permanent member of staff. It was a supply teacher, but it had been there for quite a long time. And as we were having this conversation, you could see the faces on the other science teachers they were just going white and their jaws were dropping as they realised that they had imported a young Earth creationist into their science classroom, and he had just been carrying on regardless, and they had no idea that this was happening. It's happened in my local comprehensive school. Kids of a friend of mine were quite happy to explain how the science teacher who had been teaching all of this stuff, the school had no idea that it was going on. So you don't just need to ban it, you need to police it, so far as I'm concerned. Having said that, you want to encourage kids to be independent critical thinkers, don't you? And make their own minds up. And you might think that just telling them, these are the facts, learn those, ignore that, that's all crap, just take our word for it, that's potentially to take away the opportunity for them to develop their own thinking skills and so on. And that's really what we should be encouraging. Although I am not in favour of the teaching of young earth creationism in schools, I am very much in favour of teaching critical thinking in schools, particularly when it comes to morality and philosophy and issues like that. Particularly morality and religious belief also. Every child should be reminded repeatedly that what they believe, so far as morality and religion is concerned, is entirely their free choice, and nobody should be intimidating them or threatening them about religious belief or humanist belief or anything else for that matter. So I would want to tread carefully. There are some fine distinctions we need to make when it comes to teaching kids stuff. I am very much in favour of teaching kids to think critically. That's what my book, The War for Children's Minds, is all about. But I think that when it comes to science, if it's something's an established fact beyond reasonable doubt, the universe is older than 6,000 years, you do not allow people to stand up and say, oh no, there's a case to be made for that. That's just to misrepresent the facts. It's a lie. There is no scientific debate about that. There's no scientific debate about intelligent design either. The only debate that exists is a political one, not a scientific one. So, it shouldn't be in the classroom under the guise of a scientific issue, as far as I'm concerned.
There are, I believe, tens and tens of thousands of different living species in the world. So what does YEC say about that? Were they all on the Ark? Or?
They say a number of different things. You don't necessarily get the same consistent story from all of them, and we shouldn't expect that. But they often are keen to not to talk about species. You remember right at the beginning I used the word kinds, because that's what it says in the Bible, right? And then they say that from one kind you can then develop a number of species. So you've got one kind of dog, and from which you can get Chihuahuas and Great Danes, and there's a great deal of variety there, but it's the same basic kind. So similarly, there are dinosaur kinds, of which there are not that many, actually. And all of the various, velociraptors and other raptors and so on are basically of that single kind. So it's not that you necessarily need the whole lot on board the Ark. That's a common move that they make. Because you might think that Ark it's just going to be too heavy, it's going to sink. But it's only if you've got two Argentinasauruses at 100 metres and the Ark, we know how big it was. The measurements are in the Old Testament in cubits. It's about it had a cross-section of my Victorian terraced house. How the fuck are you going to get two Argentinasauruses on board? But anyway, yeah. And the poop problem, of course, there's also that. And the food and God knows what else. I think maybe one more question and then we better stop.
I thought that your argument about fitting would just as equally well apply to the inflation theory of the Big Bang.
Well, I'm not a physicist, so I'm not here to defend that in that kind of way. But that's exactly the sort of thing that a young earth creationist would say. That is exactly what they say. They say, but that's just what scientists do. They just take... And there is a little bit of truth to this, of course, as James Ladyman was pointing out. There is a little bit of truth to this, that, once you're really wedded to a theory, you're going to protect it. And any little apparent falsifications that come along, if they're just on the periphery, you'll just bat them away and say, oh, no, that's just a product of a faulty thermometer, or... there's some little anomaly there that we haven't figured out yet, but we'll take care of it, don't worry. You protect the core theory in that kind of way. But to suggest that that's all that scientists do is to completely misunderstand what science is. It's just a lie to tell children that that's what science is. But that's what young earth creationists tell children what science is. So the real problem with young earth creationism, so far as I'm concerned, is not that it involves teaching children lies or falsehoods, that it involves teaching children to think in ways which, were they exhibited in other circumstances, we would consider symptomatic of mental illness. And they call that the scientific method. Right? That's what they understand by the scientific method, thinking like, the man who thinks that dogs are spies from the planet Venus. That's the scientific method then. No, it's not the scientific method. And that, I think, is the more dangerous aspect, really, to young Earth creationism. You're not just teaching them ludicrous falsehoods. You're teaching them to think in ways that are twisted and are going to lead them down the garden path. I think we better stop there. Thank you very much for coming.